So it is Monday, it is the day after the British MotoGP, which was a complete washout. But thankfully it's dry today, we're at Silverstone, and I'm going to ride the Triumph Moto2 prototype development bike. Oh my gosh, listen to this. Damon Hill, the Damon Hill, just jumped off it, and now I'm riding it. Wow. What's the noise? It's difficult to escape. Just the noise of it. Cold tyres, give them some time to warm up a bit. So much torque. Intoxicating. That front end, that typical Daytona front end. Oh, I'm always 50 pence in it. Steers so well. I'm blowing now. He's got the noise, he's got the power, the spread of power, and anyone can ride this. Just buttery. Buggery. Oh my God. Please Triumph. Please. Build a Daytona 765. How was that? Hunger. Needless to say, it didn't disappoint. I mean, even on the dyno, you knew it was going to ride like a beauty. Now, of course, as I mentioned on the video there, it's so difficult to get past the noise. It's almost not overwhelming, but it's a little bit, it's too difficult to get past just how good it sounds. And for the first few laps, I was like, it's just the noise. It's all about that noise. The motor itself, I mean, the throttle connection, I've never ridden a Triumph like it. Of course, we have the standard ECU or the race ECU, but the throttle connection to the rear wheel is absolutely sublime. It's almost direct enough when you want it, but it's still buttery smooth, and that sort of carries on to the motor itself. With the Honda Moto2 bikes, they have a rev parameter of about 2,000 RPM. So it's almost like an old school two-stroke where you have to keep them revving and revving and revving. This, you can almost carry first, second, third gears. There's such a wide spread of power, and that torque, that innate Triumph triple torque, it's just so different to any other race bike I've ridden. For fuck's sake. So I just got a ball sack in my... You've got the luxury of having a 15,000 RPM redline, but really you could change earlier and keep that momentum. The last sort of few hundred RPM, really it's just about the noise and pure effect really. There's no real advantage to taking it to the redline. In terms of the chassis, obviously it's a standard or standard-ish Daytona chassis, so you couldn't go far wrong anyway, really. The bike, as a standard bike, is one of the best handling bikes you can buy, and you put one of the best motors you can buy out there, and it is a perfect combination. So, you know, of course it was going to feel good, but when you've got Moto2 slicks, the tyres that these boys are running, or supposed to be running at the weekend, there's lashings of grip. I mean, you know, you really have to be a bit of a weapon to crash this bike. But yeah, I mean, unless you made a massive mistake. But in terms of grip and outright grip, there's so much of it. Obviously the bike turns very quickly anyway in standard form, but when it weighs next to bugger all, and you've got all this carbon Kevlar and the Oz wheels, I mean, it took me a good couple of laps. I was sort of 50 pensing it into the corners because I was coming into the apex too early. And even the brakes, you know, this is a standard setup. This is not even got the Brembo monoblocks from the R model. This is because the fork bottoms for the K-Tech work better with the Nissan calipers. They decided to use this lot, but there's not one moment where I thought, you know what, I need a full Brembo setup here. I mean, this master cylinder is probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, but yet the brakes are sublime. So yeah, I'll tell you what, 30 of these or 32 of these in Moto2 next year. I think someone said on our video last week that Moto2 next year has got 765% sexier. And I'll tell you what, I couldn't agree more. This bike or this engine will bring a massive amount to the class. So this is Mr. Steve Sargent, who is the Chief Product Officer.
Correct.
Yes. And it's fair to say you're in charge of this project?
So I've been involved with it from the beginning.
Yeah.
So from the first discussions with Dorna, which started back in 2016 actually. But what you've ridden today is basically the culmination of the work over the last couple of years.
So in terms of the bike itself, I mean, it's got a lot of interest, it's fair to say. I mean, masses of interest. So is it essentially a Daytona chassis with the race motor in?
Yeah, so fundamentally the main frame and the swinging arm are production items, so they're Daytona items, which, you know, people have asked, well, why didn't you develop something a bit more bespoke? And when we started off the project, we started to develop a chassis which had a little bit more adjustability in it. But the more we looked into it, the more we realised that actually the standard Daytona geometry is pretty close to what most of the Moto2 teams were running. So there was no real benefit in going away from that, and the fundamental reason for building the chassis anyway was to prove off the engine spec and make sure that the engine was something that was going to be appropriate for Moto2.
So there's no geometry changes at all, it's just the suspension, the shock obviously, and Oz wheels.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously as you've seen, we've got the K-Tech race spec front forks on there, the K-Tech rear shock, the Oz forged magnesium wheels on there, which make a huge difference to the weight, as I'm sure you appreciate. But everything else that we've done is been focused on stripping as much weight out of the chassis as we can to get to something that is equivalent to a Moto2 weight.
So the electronics, the test bike, the test mule that we've seen out in Spain, that has full Magneti Marelli, the control ECU essentially that will be raced for next year. This is running the race kit ECU.
So yeah, effectively this is a K-in ECU that's had a tune specifically developed for this engine. So we've done quite a lot of work to make sure that what you're experiencing in riding the bike is pretty close to what you'll get out of a Moto2 engine. What the bikes that the teams are running and that the chassis manufacturers have has got the Magneti Marelli ECU that has fundamentally got more adjustability for them to play around with, you know, when they get to the circuits.
And of course, a lot of people are asking, will this motor ever be available for public consumption?
So this motor in this condition, no, because obviously there are things that you can do to a race bike engine that you couldn't do on the roads. Obviously there are a lot of homologation requirements, for example, emissions standards that you need to meet, and then obviously with the Moto2 engines, they fundamentally do 3 rounds and then they get a complete engine rebuild. With a road bike engine, obviously you've got to do something that is going to be 100% durable for, you know, 50,000 miles, 100,000 miles, whatever.
And I've heard rumours of power figures. Now, what I've been told it's over 135, so that's all you can say at the moment. It's over 135 or around about 135.
Well, I could say it's 135 plus,
okay,
if that makes it any better for you. But yeah, fundamentally that's the number.
And finally, so this bike, you have what is one of the greatest engines ever built. You've got one of the nicest handling bikes ever built, and you stopped making a Daytona 675. So I think it would be sacrilege if we didn't see a 765 Daytona. So what would it take for Triumph to build a road bike of this? Because that's what everyone's asking. You know, I know the Moto2 is fantastic and it's great for Triumph, it's great for Britain, but what everyone wants to know is, when are we going to see a road bike?
So what we've always said to people about that is that fundamentally what would drive that decision would be demand for that bike. So if we get a lot of people saying, not only do I want that bike, I'd love to have that bike, but I'm willing to buy that bike, you know, then the financial realities will take over, and it will be a question of, okay, if the demand's there, people are willing to buy it, you know, then it makes sense.
So Paul Lilly, I chatted to Paul Lilly at the Street Triple launch a few years ago, and he said never say never. So this is very much a never say never.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and we've always said that.
Get involved, people. Get involved. Show some love, show some interest, and let's get this thing to production.